Welcome to IB Unplugged, a Cognity podcast for IBDP educators that tackles your submitted challenges and questions by connecting you with experts and peers who share their ideas and stories from real classrooms. Whether you're a seasoned educator or new to the IB world, each biweekly episode and guest aims to equip you with practical tips and positive inspiration, helping you teach with more confidence, creativity, and joy. So whether you're walking your dog or commuting to school, hit play and join a community of educators ready to learn, laugh, and thrive in your IB journey.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of IB Unplugged, where John and I sit down with Matthew Hayes to talk about global citizenship and some work that he's been doing there. So Matt is currently the VP of Futures and Special Projects at Sage Publishing, and he has also completed a PhD at UCL at the Institute of Education, working on education and global citizenship. So this research and his background in educational publishing has led to a lot of great work that has come to be founding material for his company, Citizens.
Yeah, Matt and I had the chance to meet at the IB Global Conference just a little while ago. And what I recognized in some of the work he's doing with Citizens is this way of kind of building portfolios for skills and personal development in a way that is recognizable and is a way that, students can value some of the things that they've done. And I guess the central principle here is that we tend to measure what we value, and often in education it comes down to grades. But what I really love about the work that Matt's doing with Citizens is it's measuring the other things that are super valuable, specifically around global citizenship. So, if you check out Citizens, the general idea is you kind of pick a specific skill area or something you want to work on. Students add in experiences and that sort of thing to that. And it kind of creates almost like a rose diagram or a wheel diagram that shows, here are my strengths versus here's kind of things I'm not interested in. And this allows then students to have a better idea of who they are. It allows schools to really measure the ways in which they're trying to teach things like global citizenship. And it helps to, communicate onto universities, what the student is about. So it's really cool work. It's basically a visual portfolio of skills and personal development. And I'm really excited for this conversation because we're talking about how we can shift the emphasis in education, and for that matter, university admissions, from grades and specific symbols into the things that are really quite important when we talk about developing a future for young people that are going to be global citizens. So really excited for this episode. We're so glad you're here, and we hope you enjoy this show with Matt Hayes. Hi, Matt. Welcome to IB Unplugged. We're so excited you can join us today.
Thank you so much for having me, John. And Courtney, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. We are looking forward to chatting with you about redefining achievement and specifically how we can start measuring skills, character, and that sort of stuff in our youth instead of just constantly coming down to grades. But before we get there, let's get a chance to get to know you a little bit better. And first warm-up question, I guess, why education?
I really love this question. So I think that the honest answer is that there's different answers in different times in your life. When I first started working in the broader knowledge and information sector straight out of university, the honest answer is that I just was such a bookworm as a kid. I loved books so much. I wanted to go into publishing. And then I moved from commercial publishing, from trade fiction and nonfiction, into education publishing. And I did that because I found that commercial publishing is fascinating, but it's quite cyclical and transactional. But in education, you get this, particularly in global education, you get this amazing ability to understand what's going on in the wider world. And you really get to engage with different schools and different education systems. So I just found it so much richer and intellectually demanding, and just learning from educators and parents and different national systems. So that was the second pivot, or the second reason to education. And then now I would say the last few years, I've got three girls, 8, 4, and 0, 5 months. And now it's just that ability to have an impact. And I honestly think, I can't think of a more important place to have an impact than in supporting the next generation. I really do believe that. And so that's particularly now with my kids, that feels the strongest driver for me at the moment.
Matt, you basically just spoke to both of us pretty heavily right now. 'Cause
I know. I was going to say, usually the why educations are way more like, John is like, yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down. Like, this is me. And for me, I'm like, finally, somebody that's like me. I also went to UCL. I studied educational publishing. I did it for the same reasons as you. And now I have a little one. And I'm like, yeah, you go, Matt. I agree.
Well, isn't it? Also, every day we read quite scary stories, whether it's about how AI is going to change everything tomorrow, or it's about the environment, or it's what's going on, geopolitically at the moment with all of the stuff coming out of the US and elsewhere. And when I see that and I think about the world that we're raising our kids in, I feel like, what can I do? And I do feel education is the best place that we can work.
And that's where I'm like, yeah, Matt, we're on the same page. I didn't do the publishing bit, but I definitely got this idea of like education is the best place to have a positive impact on the world. So, right. Well, that's a great start here.
So, one of the big things that we're going to be talking about today is like recognizing skills and character. And what first drew you to this idea that this should be core to education?
It came out of my PhD. And in my PhD, I was looking at Global Citizenship Education, which is, I think you can see it essentially as a framework for everything that exams doesn't measure. And in doing that, I realized that there was so much support for these areas of education from teachers, parents, and students, whether you call it, the 4 C's or character development or social and emotional well-being, whatever you call it. There's so much support for that. But there was also a fatigue. In a sense, there's not enough time in the curriculum. It doesn't really matter anyway. It feels like a nice to have. And I had, I suppose, a little light bulb moment where I thought, well, in the world that we know so well in all other sectors, it's really only what is measured that ultimately has value, for good or ill. And so if we are to be really pragmatic about this, the biggest impact that we could have to change what's valued in education is to start measuring it. And that is you have to handle that very carefully and do it in the right way. But that was the initial beginning. It was to measure it and to give recognition to it. And the reason why I use that term recognition is because I feel that other concepts like rewarding or incentives feel unfairly gamified, whereas the idea that a young person wants to be seen and wants to be recognized is entirely understandable. And we're all like that as adults, but particularly when you're forming as an individual, I think that sense of being seen. So it was about measuring this, but doing it in a way that felt more like recognition than like points or rewards.
Now, I noticed you're wearing the Citizens logo there on your shirt. And I only know that because we met at the Global Conference and I got to learn a little bit more about Citizens itself. And I know you were mentioning you did some academic research at UCL, and then that's moved into kind of founding Citizens here. And I guess you've commented on it already now with just, we want to measure what's valuable. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that journey. How'd you go from, the educational research to now founding Citizens?
I honestly didn't think it would happen that way. I didn't go into the research thinking this. I did a part-time master's while I was working with the education company Macmillan Education in the Middle East. And it was in international relations and diplomacy. And I've always been, like we said at the start, bookworm and academic and always loved to keep learning. But that got me into I suppose in a way it got me into global education a bit because it comes up in international relations and diplomacy. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to take this further into a PhD? And I think anyone that works on the commercial side of education, on the sales side, Courtney, maybe this might resonate a little bit, but you, rightly or wrongly, there's sometimes a little chip on our shoulder where we think we're talking to educators. You think, do I have credibility? Do I really understand what they're going through? I had done a little bit of teaching before, English language teaching, but nothing compared to the teachers I spoke to. And I thought, well, if I really want to progress in leadership in commercial education, I need to have a really strong understanding of pedagogy and have the skills to further learn about education And so that's what got me into a PhD in education. And then when I was looking for the case study or the subject area, I thought about international implementations of education, and that got me into international frameworks, which then got me into global citizenship. And it kind of it merges a little bit with international relations, because you've got all of the UN members, or most of them, signing up to it. And how is it created? Is it a Western construct, or is it an international one? But as I started my research and I started talking to teachers, and then particularly when Macmillan Education commissioned me to help advise them on their global citizenship framework, that was when, as I mentioned at the start, that's when I started to come across this general support for these areas of character development, citizenship, whatever you would like to call it, but this fatigue about the system and the sense of being trapped in the system. And the original inception moment was me thinking, oh, wouldn't it just be amazing if I could just show everyone what they're already doing? And in showing them what they're already doing at a global scale, I could show that one action, however small, can have these ripple effects. And I was really inspired there by Bobby Kennedy's speech, the Ripple of Hope speech, which I've always loved and has always been in the back of my mind. So in many respects, it was just taking that speech of Ripple of Hope and how that can create currents of change. That literally was the thinking, how do I make that a platform? And then it built out from there, because then I thought, well, how am I going to persuade students and schools to tell us what they're doing? I need to be plugged into their workflows. I need to be able to connect with their curriculum, and I need to have answers for every stakeholder in that ecosystem. So why would parents care? Why would students care? Why would universities care? Why would employers care? The whole ecosystem. So that's how I got to the initial concept of citizens. And then I was very lucky to get some funding from the UK government, which allowed me to do this co-design project with teenagers here in the UK, where I could show them some of my initial concepts that I had done in the latter stages of my PhD, and then speak to them directly and say, what do they care about? What would they like to see? And then it's built from there.
Amazing. No, I love it. I love the process. I love the intentionality behind it. And I think, I pick up a lot of what you're putting down here. It's a fantastic project. It's a fantastic initiative to be able to. I think that's also one of the things that when you do these big, like a PhD or a big research project, is the now what? It's like, I just sat on a lot of things, and if I do nothing with it and I just kind of go back to what I was doing, then there's also a discomfort in that too. So I think this is, it's a fantastic way to take what you've been learning and move forward with it.
There's some amazing things that happen in your PhD as well that I love sharing with colleagues or others, which is not just related to a PhD, but to any area where you really invest time. I remember my supervisor once saying to me, when I was asking him lots of questions, saying, Matt, you're the expert in this subject now, globally. Not as anything as grand as like you're the expert in global citizenship education. More that in a PhD, you're encouraged to focus in such a granular way. I was looking at a tiny little case study, a tiny slice that very few other people are looking at, and it's really empowering. And I think it gave me the confidence to think, well, I do know quite a lot about this area. Maybe I should do more. And I think about that for anyone that starts to get passionate or obsessed about something, that giving them the confidence to say, very quickly, you become pretty knowledgeable out there and you should do something with that.
Well, this is super exciting. And I want to dive into kind of our first segment here. And a lot of it comes down to understanding young people, and especially how they're performing and how they're measured down the road. And I guess, as a university and careers guidance counselor, I'm constantly frustrated by the ways in which admissions teams and procedures kind of go to measure students and determine if they can come to their universities. And so I'm kind of interested in, from your research and your perspective, why do you think our current systems, and those systems being just the educational system as well as maybe admissions or et cetera, why are we so often overvaluing grades and sort of numbers and that sort of stuff, and undervaluing skills like character development and global citizenship and this sort of thing?
it's such a big question, isn't it? And there's so many different answers to it. I think one reason is that it's easier to measure and easier to benchmark. So you've got a point system or a letter system. Everyone can be compared to in that context, and in a competitive environment like a university application or a job application, you can see why that is really powerful. Also, because I think so much has changed in education. So it's definitely not, it's very easy to say we still have the constructs of the 19th century and all that kind of stuff they talk about around industrial systems of education. But that's not true, in that a lot has changed. However, I think unconsciously, as an education system, all parts of it, we are still connected to that origin of education and to the notions of what good looks like. And what good looks like is academic performance. I remember even at university, and it would still be the case now, you're encouraged to talk about how I studied history. You really want to be a historian, but maybe actually you're interested in history, but you want to go on to a career in the arts or construction, right? It could be anything. It could be completely different. So everything is built around the academic notion. I think Ken Robinson also used to talk about it so beautifully, about how it's just one side of your brain, that's not the be all and end all. Mm-hmm. So I think those are two really key reasons. And then the third one is, maybe if we're honest with ourselves, up until now, and probably even right now, it is the best indicator of getting a good job, because grades will help get you into a good brand university or good brand further education. And that in turn, you can convert that credit, if you will, into then a good brand for your job. And after that point, I suppose no one really talks about your academics anymore, and you're on the ladder.
I just have to interrupt here, in that it's something that blows my mind when I'm getting applications for jobs, is like, I don't care about your GCSEs. I'm so sorry. But like, the amount of people over the age of 50 that still put their GCSEs on their resume does really surprised me. So I think people are still holding on to their grades, like 40 years later. But yeah, I don't care, but people still do apply with all of their GCSEs on their resumes.
You can understand as well, can't you? Because that probably speaks to that unconscious thing. It's like so deep rooted in all of us that how important it is. But as you say, as a, I think this is where the change is happening and will continue to happen, that as an employer, you start to realize, actually, that really isn't important. Even the university name is not important anymore, because you're thinking, what really matters in my team, and teams will probably become increasingly small as we have more automation and more, co-working with AI tools and stuff. You want a team that is cohesive. You want to find individuals that will work hard with you, that are passionate about the area, that are resilient, that be creative. All of these skills that we talk about when we talk about character development and attributes. And so I think there's already a change right now, but I think it's only going to continue as more of that sort of traditional knowledge aspect of education gets challenged by these AI tools that we work with, and you therefore become a lot more interested in all of the what folks are calling the human skills at the moment. So I think that we're at a bit of an inflection point, and it'd be interesting to see what the next few years hold.
Well, this is what's so exciting, I think, about what you've been creating with Citizens, and at least for me as an educator in a school and doing university and careers guidance counseling, I'm really excited for it, because as you've alluded to, that sort of capital that people can gain by, I went to this name university, and then I can, and then I went on to this name job, and, almost kind of looking at university more as like, here's my chance to network, for lack of a better term, instead of what am I going to gain from this particular university. I think there's some good, as you say, inflection points or good honesty that people can have and just say, like, what am I actually trying to get out of this university experience? But you've kind of alluded to it already here with, like, there's some limitations when we just say, here's the grade or here's the university. Like, that's not really what we're trying to do as citizens, and I think if we are as educators, I think we're trying to grow global citizens. I think we're trying to grow people who are going to contribute well to a meaningful society. And so I'm interested, I think there's limitations in the educational recognition pathway. And you've kind of alluded to some of them, but I'm wondering from your perspective, what are some of the other limitations that exist now in our, how we recognize educational progress?
Yeah, you're so right, because also even just in the conversation we've just had, I've fallen into a little bit of that trap of the utilitarian one of thinking just about jobs, which is easy to do because you're trying to be really practical and honest about one very significant element of what education is for and what parents would want for their kids. Mm-hmm. But when we go back to our conversation at the start about why education for all of us and about the next generation, often you're not, with your kids, you're not really just thinking about a good job. You're thinking about them being confident in themselves, them finding their particular passions, their particular purpose, them being kind, and all these other ways of thinking of what a good citizen is. So I think that's also one layer that is completely overlooked in the current framework for educational recognition, and could be overlooked still if we're not careful with how we measure skills and values and attributes, because it shouldn't just be about creating some kind of stamp or a credit system at the end. It should also be very similar to, John, your conversations with students in careers guidance. It should be about looking at a map of things you've been doing against different skills or attributes, and thinking, what are you good at? What would you like to be good at? Mm-hmm. What are your passions? Finding your ikigai, all of those things. So I think there's the identity aspect and the preparing yourself for hopefully a long life where you'll constantly be changing, that is completely overlooked as well in that system.
What's frustrating with it is it's like the idea is that the university is kind of this intermediary stage between high school and whatever your jobs are. Maybe you do different things in between. And if we're just focusing on the job part and you're just saying that university is for then the job, even in that element, we're not getting it right, because that's not how you get a job. That's not what employers look for in the same way. You don't take it for, unless you're, maybe becoming a doctor, you're not taking a test to enter most jobs. Those are not happening. And when you go in and you interview, I can speak from Cognity, for example, we have a values-based interview that's going to be asking you about how your values and the company values are aligned. That's critical thinking that has to be developed over time. We're asking about what your passions are, what you're good at, what you think that you can contribute to the company. These are all the things that we consider really important. So you would think that the intermediary stage would feel the same way. That would be what would prepare you for what they're trying to prepare you for. I don't know. That's just my take on it.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I think then even when you then talk to educators at universities, they would agree and say the same, but they're also trapped in a system. Yeah. That particular higher education system has its own. And this is a good example of where what you measure can shape behavior. There, you have the university rankings globally. And a big factor in that is academic research and the citations of that research. And if you publish more, you'll get better citations. You'll be seen as a stronger research university. You'll get more funding, which in turn will make you better. And so you can see the dangers of measuring on just one thing there. And I think that also means in some universities, there's less esteem given to the teaching side of faculty, because the recognition to the university is on the research side. Yeah. So there's a tiny little example there where if we could start to really celebrate the teaching side and how the amazing professors that we've come across before, can really turn around a student, open their eyes to things. If you could celebrate that, then maybe that will lead to a greater focus in the university, and then also onto these other areas that we've been talking about as well. So no, I completely agree with you, Courtney.
I think you're absolutely right then. We definitely have a moment and something we need to kind of take advantage of here within education, and to say, all right, how we can really shape this around the things we want to create for young people moving forward. And I guess it leads really nicely into our next segment here. We want to get into, your research foundations, and specifically in youth skills and developing character and that sort of thing. And I know you've mentioned it before, obviously doing research at UCL's Institute of Education on global citizenship education. And I'm interested, how did that research, how did that time shape your thinking around skills and character?
I mean, in so many ways, as you can imagine. I think the first big one was that it is possible to find a language or a framework for these areas that mostly everyone agrees on. That's a bold statement, isn't it?
How's that going for you?
It's like,
But I think it is possible. I think global citizenship education is just constantly underestimated because we don't celebrate enough that, hang on, mostly every UN member state has signed up to this. They literally, not just to the overall concept, but to quite a lot of granularity that UNESCO have then provided, which breaks down the attributes that we all aspire for in our citizens, both in terms of the impact that they can have as citizens in their community, but also their own development as individuals. So I think that was the one big lesson, but obviously with a lot of nuances. My particular case study was on the UAE, where I was based for a while. And when I was there, I was with that company, Macmillan Education, I mentioned, and I was working with the Ministry of Education on particular projects. So I was fortunate when I did my PhD to have those connections and that understanding of the system. And my case study was looking at how this international concept of global citizenship education was implemented in UAE curricula and in the public school system. And so the first thing there I found was, first of all, there is this framework that countries like the UAE have signed up to, that they are also embedding in their schools. But then what was interesting is that that's where the nuances then come in, because then you get the local expression of some of these international concepts. And so I think the other thing that I learned was that for global citizenship education to be successful, and for any initiative in this area to be successful, you need to have both. You need to have both a big picture view that is global, for want of a better word, or like bigger than an individual context, but you also need to find a way to make it really resonate locally. And so that's why with citizens, I talk about these concepts of benchmarking, because I believe that hopefully I can create a benchmark that has value, because all of our students and our member schools are recognizing it, and that adds weight to it, which in turn then means when you take it to university, it has value. So you need that kind of international benchmark that is recognizable and that everybody understands the language of, and that benchmarking can be made off the back of. But then also you need to think about, in each individual country, in each individual school, what matters to them and what's going to make this work for them. And so with global citizenship education, it was about, in the UAE, it's also really important to focus on national civic development, because it's a relatively young country, and there's a really large expatriate community. So that's a really significant element. And equally, when I talk to schools with citizens, where I find the adoption of citizens the most successful, or just more generally, the adoption of a focus on expanding what's valued beyond academics, it's when the school says, these are our values, this is what really matters to us, and it has this heritage of, this is why we were founded in the first place, this is related to the community that we operate in, to the kind of pathways that our students go on to, and so it's hyper-specific. That seems to me the best possible uptake, and that's when it really starts to take root. So those two areas, as a starter for 10, I would say are big lessons for me.
Becoming a better IBDP educator is a daily practice informed through reading, research, personal experience, and episodes from IB Unplugged, like the one you're listening to right now. But sometimes the show can go a bit too quickly. or we simply forget some of the key points once we're out of the car or back from our walk. So to revisit the content in a condensed version, you can download the episode summary at cognity.com/IB Unplugged. You'll find useful links to other resources and exciting bits of information that you can use immediately in your daily practice. So now, back to the show.
You can see it really resonating. I mean, even now we're kind of doing Council of International Schools, review. We're going through that again, reaccreditation. And a big element that's come out of that is like, okay, global citizenship education. And how are you identifying it? What are your parameters and how are you measuring it? And so even as we were kind of reflecting on that, how have we been doing it thus far? What are the ways we can improve it? I was constantly coming back to some of the stuff that you've put together with citizens actually, and just going, okay, this is a nice sort of framework and it makes sense. This is easy that we could implement with students too. So you can see how, what you've experienced. And I think, just as you said, it's highly applicable across many, many different schools. And I think a lot of accrediting bodies and a lot of schools are looking for this. They want to have more value placed around global citizenship.
I suppose just riffing off that, it connects back to when Courtney was joking with me around, the how we all have different views of this system of skills and values, and everyone has different language, which is totally true. But a really good example of where I think it's possible to square that circle, for example, Council of International Schools and what they're doing with your school at the moment, is to say, okay, here is the language that UNESCO and others use around global citizenship. But here it is mapped to our language, where actually we prefer not to talk about, civic advocacy. And instead, we prefer to use these terms because they're more relevant to our context. And I think that bridge is where the magic happens, because before that bridge, then there's just so much education that needs to happen and so much constant re-explaining of terms, and also a danger that everyone feels like they have something imposed upon them, rather than just celebrating what you're already doing and trying to do more of it.
Yeah. Yeah. These kind of topics are some of the ones that are too easily falling into like the surface level check mark of like, yeah, I do global citizenship in my classroom because I talked about it once and it's on the syllabus. So I do think that it makes a lot of sense what you're saying of having these bigger ideas, but then really diving into what that means for your specific context. And then like John saying with the reviewing and saying like, where does this actually go, and have it be a really intentional part of the teaching, I think really matters. I want to think more about the assessing of the youth skills and character and some of the lessons that you've really learned in that specific element.
So this area is constantly fascinating to me, and I think is something that I'm always learning about and want to keep a really critical eye on and be challenged about as well. I like to use this phrase, fighting fire with fire, because it reminds me. So first of all, when we circle back to earlier, we said about, what you measure is what you value. And therefore, if we're not measuring all these other areas, we should be, because that would hopefully lead to them being valued more and ultimately given more resource, more energy, more time. So that's the fighting fire with fire concept. But then it's no accident that we're talking about fire. You've got to be really careful when you're playing with fire. So I also think about that. I think about the worst thing that I or others in this space could do is create all the wrong incentives, and to make it that tick box exercise that you mentioned, Courtney, or worse than a tick box exercise, have all this energy going in the wrong areas. So I think there's a few things that have guided me so far. Firstly, I like the idea of thinking of this as formative assessment rather than summative. And I'm probably borrowing those terms incorrectly, but I like the idea that in Citizens, one of the main ways that we assess is through mapping what students tell us they've done to this visual wheel. And that wheel can be constructed on different frameworks. It can be my benchmarks from my PhD research, but it can also be the school's framework. And so the formative side around assessment, I think, is literally just showing the student, look at how what you've done already maps to these areas, but then also look at this broader universe and see whether it interests you and whether you'd like to focus on those areas as well. And particularly with my own benchmarks, I want that broader universe to not be something that can be completed. I don't want it to become, I want to fill in every part of my wheel and be fully, we have a heat map that colors things in, be fully colored in, because that would defeat the point of your individual strengths and where you've chosen to spend your time. And if I go back to the co-design work that we did with teenagers in the UK, where we had that UK government funding, we also talked to employers, and there was a few things that came up. So the first thing that came up was that on the student side, they often didn't know the skills they developed until you drew attention to that. So that formative aspect of assessing, I find really inspiring. And that's why I sometimes think of it as a Fitbit for your personal development. You're trying to focus intrinsically on what matters. And then on the employer side, they would say, we actually don't just want to see a portfolio or an award of all the things that the student has done and achieved. We also want to understand what universe this sits in and what they have not focused on, because only by seeing where they've not focused can we see where they've specialized. And that was really interesting because some students were a bit intimidated by that. They kept saying, I'd like to have a version of my profile that doesn't show the gaps, that just shows the strengths. But I think that's where employers, and not just employers, but anyone that's trying to make meaning of data like this, would want to see the gaps. And they're not to be feared, they're to be celebrated.
Yeah, I mean, it's super suspicious if you're like, what are you working on? Or in an interview, like, what are you working on? Or what do you want to develop more? And they're like, I just care too much. That's my only problem. And it's like,
you're telling me I shouldn't be saying that in my interviews?
I just try too hard.
Yeah. But you can see, I mean, definitely in like a meritocratic society where kids would then see like, okay, there's this wheel or a Rose diagram or something, like if I want to be the best here, or want to present my best, I should have all these things complete, right? So you could definitely see where somebody would want to lean that direction.
Yeah, and I need to keep thinking intelligently about how I can guide students through that, and use language like not having that particular area of a framework shown as complete doesn't necessarily mean that you're bad at that, or that you don't have anything in that area. It just means that you haven't yet shown it. You haven't yet got the evidence.
That opens up lots of great coaching conversations that you could have with either a mentor or careers guidance or something like this. And, what I liked, because I've seen the, kind of the wheel diagrams and this sort of thing. And what I like about that is then the students are kind of selecting, here are the experiences, or here's the things that I have done that help to show my intercultural understanding, or my ability to reflect, or my ability to understand that other people, even though they're different than me, can also be right, that sort of stuff. And that can come from any type of experience they might select. And then, as the mentor or somebody else, you're kind of validating that, you're having a conversation around it. So it feels way more qualitative. And I think, I would assume I'm not alone in referencing this for most educators. I think we look at assessment practices and we look at what we're assessing. And just as you've said, whatever you assess seems to be the thing that we spend most time on. And we go, that's not the point, right? We say, that's not really why I want to do this. I don't have to have you understand all the intricacies of biology. I want you to develop along the way and understand your critical thinking skills and your communication skills and that sort of stuff. So what I'm interested in here is, how does that evidence-based research really allow us to think critically about how we're changing the assessment model? Because I've had so many conversations with teachers where they're like, we just need to switch it and it'd be way better if it was this. But that feels a little bit flippant. That feels like it almost disrespects the research that's going on here. Can you talk to that a little bit? Like, why is that evidence-based research so critical when we're talking about changing assessment practices?
Yes. So I think a few things there. I think one of the aspects of my research was, because it was around global citizenship, it was looking at, I suppose, for want of a better word, socioeconomic factors as well, and ideas of fairness, and global north, global south, and things like that. And so, one good example of how that would relate to this kind of assessment is, it'd be tempting to say, okay, what are the building blocks for making this assessment valuable? let's make sure that we have evidence for everything that the student says they've developed. So if they're going to say they've got really good leadership, we need to have evidence for that. Then it needs to be appropriately qualified and categorized into, is that a really high level of leadership, or is that just, maybe that's just more teamwork and they haven't yet moved into, or it's an early stage leadership, all those sort of things. And then there's also a verification layer. Should this also not be verified by someone that we trust, like a teacher backed by the brand of a school, to say, this genuinely did take place, and I've also seen what the student feels they've developed around leadership, and I agree with where they've qualified their development around leadership. But as soon as you start to get into that, you start to see some of the pitfalls. First of all, there's the practical one. In addition to all of the grading that teachers are already doing, do we want to have them be getting notifications every day to say that, Matt has just added a reflection about leading his football team, or entrepreneurship stream, whatever, and you need to go in and verify it and you need to tag it. And even if you could do that, then are we going to create massive, I suppose, inequality, where you're going to have the schools, the teachers that have the time to do that versus those that do not.
Right.
And so students would get unfairly maligned because they don't have that layer. So I suppose the evidence base is to be incredibly careful around that, whilst recognizing that that's important. So I think this is where micro-credentialing is quite a useful sector to look at. And I like to think of, I have a visual for this that I've been thinking about myself, where you have a spectrum of things on that micro-credentialing framework, where you have an assertion of a skill that you believe you have, which is the kind of stuff you see on CVs right now. Then you have a portfolio of stuff you've done, but it's not connected to skills. Then you have a portfolio plus the skills related to those items of evidence. And then you have those layers of like testimonials from trusted people, verification layers, and so on. And so I think understanding assessment as that spectrum, and maybe using different slices of that for different means, is what the evidence base would show us. So be very clear, like, are you thinking of this in your school more as the formative assessment that I've been talking a lot about here, where it's not really that important whether this student or that has a slightly more developed level of leadership than another. What's more important is that they've had a chance to reflect themselves about it. They've had a chance to document what they've done, and that when they are asked about it in a future context which matters to them, they'll be able to talk credibly about it.
Yeah, I think that reflection piece is so key, because it, like you said, for teachers, this framework gives them a way to explain things. It also gives students a way to explain things. If you ask a student, why should this university accept me? They'll usually be like, well, I got this predicted grade and then I did that. Like, it's these facts, like you said before, of like the things that are assessed are the things that matter to them. So if they're thinking about why a university should accept them, they're going to fall back on the things that they can explain. And by giving this framework, by being able to say, the university should accept me because I have these skills that I've developed through these activities, that's such a fundamental skill for your whole life, to be able to describe yourself in an intelligent way, to be able to say, this is what I'm good at and this is how I can show you that I've mastered these things. Also, on the other side, this is what I'm still working on, or these are things that are not my core strengths, but I've either decided to prioritize somewhere else, or this is what I'm doing about it. But these kind of frameworks are so pivotal for giving students the words and the structure to be able to self-reflect and self-evaluate. So I'm on board.
Absolutely. I think that's where the potential with AI is interesting, because there's different stages in that workflow that you could introduce it in powerful ways. But there's also harm that you could do introducing it. So I keep talking to our schools a lot about this. For example, do you want it at the moment that students are documenting what they've done? Probably not. And in some cases, the curricula that they're studying towards would actively not want that. But equally then, there are good arguments for where some students, it may help them. For example, if they can record a voice note about something they've done and that they can work with an AI tool to further improve that. But I think definitely at the end, you can see how it'd be really valuable. If you've been using a platform like Citizens over the course of your career at school to document things that matter to you, and ideally have done it in your own voice, with all of the failings inherent to that. And then when you apply to a university or to a job, you can take information about that university and what they're looking for, and then you can get some prompts back to say, hey, don't forget to talk about this and maybe look at this aspect of what you did here. You can see how that could be very powerful and useful, particularly when you're still at an age where you haven't yet been able to build that really confident self-awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many times when I'm talking with students as they're writing their personal statements and they struggle to kind of talk about themselves and understand the strengths that they've done. So I like what you're saying here, because effectively students build a whole portfolio of the things that they've done, and then they might they could use an AI assistant, or if not, they just look back through it and they go, oh yeah, I did that thing. And then whether it's a coaching conversation with that mentor or the guidance counselor, or an AI tool, to then go, yeah, mention these things, bring this out. This is where you're demonstrating what this university is kind of looking for. You can see where this has some real power to it. Now, I know you're writing a white paper for Citizens on skills and extracurricular recognition. And let's just dive into that very briefly. What's kind of the central argument? Is it kind of the stuff we've already been talking about here, or is there something else?
Yeah, it is a lot about that. It's also very deliberately framed as a founding white paper, because for my own discipline, I want to take everything that's in my head and that I've put in lots of different places and really have that, because I've got the mission statement and the original focus for Citizens, but to actually lay it down and say, so this is our view of the world, this is what we think will change it, and this is what we're going to do to get there. Mm. So there's that founding aspect to it. But then I hope also, if I draw out aspects of my research and what I've seen elsewhere in the world on this area, that will be of interest to educators, whether or not they use Citizens or not, just showing that it feels like it's an idea whose time has come. It's not, it's no one's idea in particular, something that everyone's been talking about for years, decades. And you can see there's lots of best practice in different countries and different schools. So I'm excited to be able to show that and to show that it is possible, and there's some amazing work that's going on in this area.
Yeah, it definitely lends itself to an evolution that I think we're all hoping to see within education, the way we measure things and that sort of thing, and not just for schools, universities, employers, et cetera. If we can really kind of pivot away from, we've been measuring content knowledge for a long time and how well a student knows a particular subject. And, especially if students are applying to the UK and they're applying with a personal statement there, it's, what do you know about this subject? Just as you alluded to earlier, right? Tell me how much you love history and all you want to do about history instead. And recognizing no, I think citizenship these days kind of, it's something different. And I'm kind of interested to know, if we don't embrace that evolution, what are we going to miss out on? What are the possible consequences for schools, for universities, employers, if we don't recognize that we've got a good inflection point, as you said here? And if we don't act on that, what's going to happen?
Absolutely. I really love that question, because actually you reminded me of something I forgot to mention in the intent of the founding white paper, which is to talk about this less as a opportunity and as a nice to have, and more as an imperative, because some of the risks is, if we don't do this, are really quite troubling in so many areas. So we could talk about just a few. One of them would be that I hope to show that this is already happening in lots of schools and in lots of education systems. And it's probably no accident that a lot of the early adopters of Citizens are some of the most well-funded, prestigious schools. So you already see a trap there. A trap for me with my mission, and a trap for anyone working in this space, is that I think if we don't try to encourage the whole system to get on board, we could end up with Another source of inequality that we talked about earlier, this almost like a two-state system where you've got students that have been to amazing international schools or private schools where they have, yes, focused on good grades, but they've also been able to be given all these amazing other opportunities and to really reflect on things. You hear about schools that have even dedicated mental health centers and things like, it's definitely happening all over the world. But then a student at a state school or a low-funded public school in the US where they haven't been given those opportunities whatsoever, and they've just been focusing on the academics. And if we really believe in everything that we were saying earlier around what employers value and what will also help you pivot through your life and make that career change that you're probably going to have to make 5 years into your job, just given the pace of change, that right there is a horrible risk to talk about, but we have to talk about it. And then there are all the ones we talked about at the start when we think about our kids. There's ultimately what happens in the world is driven by humans, and we're talking about developing the next generation of humans. What if we end up with humans that are very good at using these AI tools to replicate the system that exists today, but have no sense of creativity to come up with solutions to the big problems we face, or to come up with new economic ideas, new ways of adding value in society, and offsetting the job losses that looks like we would most likely see as a result of AI. And then also the conflicts that we have and the migration flows that we know are going to become an issue. All of those macro forces that seem quite abstract, but actually in the decades that we talk about when we're thinking about our kids that are starting schooling right now, they will become real. And if we don't prepare them for it, I think that would be on us. So that to me is another really big risk.
I'm glad you brought up that AI piece, because the way I'm kind of looking at it feels like there's a real leveling that can happen here, because so many of the ways that we're assessing in education systems right now are vulnerable to Gen AI. And so there's almost a potential here where students could see this as like, well, if I jump through that hoop and that hoop, then I can get the best looking profile. And if everybody does that, there's then suddenly a leveling across that horizontal discourse where now I don't really have any way to compare one person against the other for university admissions or whatever else. And so it's really incumbent upon us to show, like, here are the things that are not AI-able that matter. And it seems like it's the obvious direction we have to go. And therefore, universities and I guess all schools need to be looking at stuff like what you're doing here with Citizens and go, this is what we want to value. This is what we measure. This is what is most important to us. Not necessarily this assessment that is vulnerable to Gen AI, but these things that are truly a human quality that you can bring to the table. Otherwise I think it's like I got WALL-E going on in my head right now. And I know I reference so many animated films on this show, and I apologize to our listeners, but that's just there, this idea of like, yeah, what are humans bringing to the table anymore? And we've got a really good opportunity here that we need to take hold of.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, aside from things like WALL-E, it's all too easy to imagine how, knowing the infrastructure that we do and knowing the stakeholders as we do, that AI could just be used to optimize a current system. And it kind of is already, isn't it? When you look at all the case studies that we're seeing at the moment and some of the stuff on social media and everything, it does look like it's being used just to optimize an existing system, particularly outside of those really well-funded schools that have smaller student to teacher ratio and can therefore use AI in really transformative ways and engage with it. Beyond that, it looks like it's helping with marking and helping with lesson plans, but it's still the same curriculum. It's still the same subject matter. So I see an all too real future where that's all that happens. And then the gap just continues to widen between those elite schools and everybody else.
I want to kind of wrap things up. Something that John and I always want to make sure is that teachers and people who are listening can feel like there are some really actionable things that they can start with right now. What kind of advice would you have if you're a teacher, you're an administrator who's like, I really want to make some changes within my own school? where do I start?
I think the most powerful thing I've seen is if you start with the school's already written down and declared values and mission and sense of itself. So, if you go to every school website, they have their 5 key values, and every school is idiosyncratic in that respect, and they all refer to different things. I think if you start with that and then map that to whichever framework or whichever area you're particularly interested in. So if it's around, entrepreneurship and you're looking to focus on that, then map that to some of the values for the school. And then focus on building those portfolios of how students are evidencing that. I think that will get you a lot of traction in the school because it ties into understanding how we all work in political environments. You'll be able to show your principal, look, when you're talking to prospective parents, you're always championing that this is what's unique about our school. Look here, this is what our students have done. And here you can see how they're meeting those values. And I think getting that senior stakeholder approval in that way will then free up for you the other things that you're going to need, like the additional resources, the extra time, the energy and the focus. I think that is one area. And then the other area is obviously engaging directly with the students and seeing what would excite them and unlocking some of the stuff that we saw in our interviews with students, where actually just spending a bit of time to celebrate and to recognize them for what they're doing can then also in itself get them on board as an ally with you to start spending more time on these areas as well. Mm-hmm. So I would say the first thing is to think quite strategically about it and to align it with your school. And I think that is a real recipe for success.
Start with the mission, vision, and values of your school, and then meet directly with students, find out what's important to them.
Yeah. Perfect.
Super actionable advice. Matt, really, really wonderful to get to chat with you here and talk about all the things you're doing with citizens and the real opportunity that we have, as an entire society here to take that step forward into the next evolution of education. So really, really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
IB Unplugged is a Cognity podcast hosted by John Patton and Courtney Marlene and produced by Catalina Gaffney. Be sure to subscribe or follow and share with your fellow IB educators. If you'd like to submit a topic, request, or question, please do so on cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Let's keep the conversation going and support each other in teaching with confidence, creativity, and joy. See you next time.